You know how sometimes you look at a topic like ethics, and it just feels like, wow, this huge maze. So many different theories, different ideas,
Yeah, it can definitely seem overwhelming.
right? Trying to figure out what really matters. Well, that's what we're tackling today. We've got this really thought-provoking piece you shared, Chapter 1 of Professional Generalism Ethics.
That's the one.
And our goal here, our mission, is really to pull out the crucial insights from this chapter, give you a bit of a shortcut, to understanding these different ethical perspectives.
And maybe even find a framework that works in your professional life.
Exactly, without getting totally bogged down in, like, endless philosophical debate. So we're working with excerpts from this book chapter.
Yep, just focusing on the core ideas presented there.
And we're going to explore some pretty fundamental questions, I think, like, what are the main ways thinkers have approached right and wrong? And can these different ideas, which sometimes seem totally opposed, actually work together, especially at work?
That's a key question the chapter raises.
And, ultimately, what does all this mean for making decisions that are, well, fair and effective?
Absolutely. And the chapter starts right at the foundation, defining ethics. Fundamentally, it's about our standpoints, our perspectives towards humanity and the world.
Okay, our viewpoints.
Yeah, and what's really interesting is the dynamic it highlights. Our perspectives shape how we interact, right? Professionally, personally.
Sure.
But then the results of those interactions, they feed back and influence our perspectives again. It's like a continuous loop.
Ah, okay. So it's not just a one-way street. Our beliefs drive our actions.
But what happens because of those actions can reinforce or challenge those beliefs.
Exactly.
Got it. Now, the chapter also mentions professional ethics. How does that fit in?
Well, professional ethics, as the chapter lays it out, basically takes these broader ideas and applies them to specific job contexts. It's about the conduct expectations set by, professional bodies, companies, management.
The rules of the game in a particular field? Pretty much. These become the accepted principles within that profession. And as we know, not following them can have real consequences.
Oh, yeah. Sanctions, losing your license, that kind of thing.
Exactly. There are definite stakes involved.
But the chapter isn't just focused on those specific professional codes, is it? It makes a distinction.
Right. And that's important. The focus here is more on the foundational, the generic schools of ethical thought.
Okay, why that focus?
Because the idea is that these broader frameworks are what actually inform the specific professional codes. The chapter points out that professional guidelines often blend principles from several of these schools.
Ah, so they pick and choose.
Sort of, yeah. Depending on the profession, the social norms, the specific situation. So understanding these core perspectives gives you a deeper insight into where professional ethics actually comes from.
Makes sense. Okay, so let's do it. Let's take that whirlwind tour of these foundational schools. Where do we start?
First up, natural law. The core idea here is that the universe, including us, operates according to inherent universal laws, almost like laws of physics,
Predetermined rules.
Yeah. The chapter gives a simple example. We have to eat to avoid starving. That's a physical reality, a natural law, regardless of what we want or believe.
Right, a basic constraint. Ties into fate, maybe.
Often does, yeah. The idea that things unfold according to these set laws.
Okay, so very ordered view. What's next?
Then there's behaviorism. In its classic form, this sees living things as stimulus-response machines, like cause and effect in physics.
Input, output.
Basically, traditional behaviorism suggests you can predict and change behavior through rewards, punishments, manipulating the stimuli and responses.
So humans is sort of programmable.
That's the underlying idea in that view, yes.
Okay, different direction now. Pragmatic ethics. That sounds, well, practical.
It is. Pragmatism is all about testing the practical usefulness of knowledge through long, careful inquiry, constantly trying to find and fix errors in our understanding.
So it doesn't believe in absolute truths.
Exactly. It questions eternally valid truths and rejects just relying on intuition. The chapter uses science as an example. Findings aren't final. They can always be replaced by better evidence later.
Okay, so truth evolves based on what works, what proves useful. Got it. What other lenses do we have?
Then we get deontological ethics. This one is all about following rules and procedures.
Duty-based.
Precisely. The idea is that certain standards are inherently right or wrong, no matter the consequences.
Yeah.
The morality is in the action itself.
So ignoring the rules is inherently bad.
From this viewpoint, yes. It signals disrespect for society, for the established order. It's about the principle of the thing.
Okay. The act itself matters most. Then what?
Next is normative constructivism. This judges actions mainly by their results, their outcomes.
Opposite of deontology, that.
In a way, it assumes we can predict outcomes pretty well, that there are clear right and wrong results, and that we have rational tools to make decisions in any situation.
So it's about getting the desired results through rational planning.
That's the core idea. Then, a really well-known one, utilitarian ethics.
Ah, the greatest good one.
Exactly. The ends justify the means if the action brings the most happiness or well-being to the most people.
But that can get tricky.
Very tricky. As the chapter notes, it can lead to situations where a minority might be harmed or their rights ignored for the sake of the majority's benefit.
Yeah, always a tough balance. What else is there?
The chapter brings in existential dialectic. This philosophy highlights our individuality as conscious beings who create our own meaning.
So meaning isn't predetermined.
No. It comes from our lived experience. This view suggests subjectivity is fundamental, making truly objective rationality kind of unrealistic.
Everyone sees things through their own lens.
Okay.
How does that compare to situational ethics?
Situational ethics pushes the context idea even further. It actually denies that objective, universal laws apply at all.
Wow. Okay, so what does apply?
Judgments have to consider the specific context, what's good for the majority in that particular time and place. Local rationality is key.
So right and wrong aren't fixed. It depends entirely on the situation.
That's the core argument. And it sees science as limited in giving absolute answers because of subjectivity and changing contexts.
Okay. Very context dependent. What's next?
Then we have virtue ethics. This school says moral character comes from our internal qualities, our mindset, things you can't always see.
So it's not just what you do.
Right. The chapter notes these internal traits might not always show up in behavior because of outside pressures, but virtue ethics says we're defined by our beliefs and mindset, not just actions.
It's about cultivating good character.
Yeah.
Interesting. And the last one mentioned.
The care feminist movement. This looks at power dynamics and interdependence in relationships.
Our dynamics, okay.
It argues for care as a core ethical duty. Those with more power have a responsibility to care for the more vulnerable.
So using power responsibly.
Exactly. It acknowledges inequality exists, but argues against using it to control or widen gaps. Instead, inequality should prompt more sharing, support, empathy, not exploitation.
Empathy, responsibility, connection. That's a powerful perspective too. Wow, okay, so that's quite a range of schools.
It really is.
And the chapter then asks the big question. Can these diverse, sometimes conflicting approaches actually coexist? Can they complement each other?
That is the crux of it, isn't it? The chapter suggests, yes, reconciliation is possible, but
There's always a but.
But it requires letting go of absolutism, the idea that any one of these schools holds the entire exclusive truth.
So you can't just pick one and say, this is it.
The chapter argues against that. It suggests that just opposing other views without looking for common ground or seeing value in other approaches, well, that can just reinforce dogma, indoctrination even.
That makes sense. Just
Right.
digging your heels in doesn't lead anywhere. So how does the chapter suggest reconciliation might work? It gives examples.
It does. It shows how seemingly opposing ideas can still hold elements of truth. Take natural laws again.
Okay.
We might not have found one single universal law governing everything, right? But the chapter reminds us we do face real physical limits.
Like needing food.
Exactly. That limit exists regardless of our beliefs. So while a grand unified law might be elusive, there are definitely some laws governing the physical world.
So even without the full rule book, there are undeniable realities. What's another example?
How about cause and effect? We see it everywhere, right? We use it to adapt, even to form ideas about natural laws.
Sure, it seems obvious.
But the chapter points out our observations are limited by our senses. They describe what happens, but don't always fully explain why or perfectly predict the future. Things are complex, always changing.
So our understanding is always incomplete.
Always partial, always subject to revision. Today's explanation might just be tomorrow's description of a phenomenon we understand better later.
Humbling. What about science? How does that fit into reconciliation?
Science, with its experiments and questioning, is obviously hugely valuable. It helps us understand the world, develop new ways to interact with it, refine laws.
No question.
But the chapter asks, can science, right now, measure and explain everything?
Probably not.
The answer seems to be no, at least for now. And maybe there will always be things beyond what science can currently grasp.
So it's a powerful tool, but with limits. Not the answer to everything. Okay, what about norms? Those unwritten rules.
Right. The chapter suggests norms develop from our collective experience. Past actions, observed consequences lead to best practices, which become norms, laws, standards. We often trust them initially.
Things passed down through generations, in families, work, culture.
Exactly. We adopt them. But then our own experiences, maybe new scientific knowledge, might make us question if these old rules always apply.
So we start to think, does this still make sense here, now?
Precisely. We reconsider their validity across different contexts and times. Norms aren't set in stone.
So they're a starting point, but open to review. Makes sense. And finally, what are the outcomes of our actions? How do different views on those get reconciled?
Well, our understanding grows by seeing the results of what we do, often based on cause and effect. But the chapter asks, how do we evaluate those results objectively?
Right. Who benefits? How much? How do different people see those benefits?
Exactly. Will everyone agree on whether an outcome is good? Probably not. Our feelings, our logic, they don't always line up perfectly with scientific data or established norms. Different people will see the same outcome differently.
Which brings us back to subjectivity, doesn't it? Everyone has their own viewpoint.
It does. But the chapter doesn't stop there. It moves towards this idea of the power of reconciled ethical principles.
Okay, so combining them somehow. What does that look like?
It proposes a more unified framework, one that values the strengths of different schools by bringing them together, finding a synthesis.
Like mixing ingredients?
Kind of. Maybe blending the logic of deontology with the context awareness of situational ethics and the compassion of feminist ethics, for example.
Okay, taking the best bits.
Aiming for that, yeah. The goal is to balance having clear principles with being flexible enough to handle complex ethical decisions in different situations.
So it's not about picking one right way, but building a more adaptable toolkit, using insights from many ways.
That's the idea. And the chapter suggests these reconciled principles can help professionals, like you, navigate ethical dilemmas with more clarity, more inclusiveness.
That sounds useful. It mentions table 1.1 briefly, about extremes.
Right, just to show what happens if you take each school to its absolute extreme total rejection versus total acceptance. Like for natural law, everything is random versus everything is predetermined.
Polar opposites.
Or deontology, we're totally free versus we must obey rules blindly. Those extremes aren't very helpful in the real world, the chapter suggests.
Yeah, life's usually more gray than black and white. Okay, so table 1.2 gets into the specifics of these reconciled principles. There are a lot. Can we look at some highlights, maybe ones that offer those aha moments?
Definitely. Let's dip into some examples. Under Part 1, Laws of the Observable, there's EP1. It says laws are human constructs, provisional models of relationships.
Like economic laws. Useful models, but not perfect predictors.
Exactly. And EP2 reminds us all laws have errors because the world varies. Think weather forecasts never 100% right. EP4 notes laws carry the subjective interpretations of the people who created them, like different schools of psychology having different laws of behavior.
Ah, the human element again.
And EP6 says even good models aren't eternal truths. The standard product life cycle in business doesn't fit every single product perfectly, right?
True. These really show the limits of our models. What about part 2, the unobservable?
Well, EP12 suggests ideas about things we can't see, like string theory in physics can be plausible explanations, but they aren't proven laws yet.
Theoretical frameworks.
Right. But EP13 offers hope. It says what's unobservable now might become observable later, like gravitational waves. Einstein predicted them long before we could detect them.
Cool. Our understanding expands. What about part 3, norms? We talked about those.
EP14 explains how norms often arise from repeated events or perceived links when we don't have formal laws yet. Like early astronomers assuming wobbling stars meant orbiting planets before they could see them.
An initial guess based on observation.
Yeah. And EP15 says norms spread through interaction, people copying others, like that move fast and break things mantra in tech.
Ah, culture formation.
But EP16 warns that norm-based rules are generally weaker, more questionable than rules based on solid laws. Think corporate best practices versus actual legal requirements.
So norms are like first drafts, maybe less rigorous.
Okay, part 4. Applicability of laws and norms. This seems really important for context.
Hugely. EP17 says current laws and norms are the starting point for newcomers, like physics students, starting with today's quantum laws.
You start with what's known.
But EP18 cautions laws don't easily transfer to different contexts. Newton's laws don't work at the atomic scale, for instance.
Right, context matters.
EP20 notes that as knowledge grows, old laws can even seem irrelevant, like early AI safety ideas being too simple now. And EP21 is crucial. All laws have exceptions. Think genetics and Mendel's laws.
It's always more complex.
Always. And EP22 says established norms aren't a good reason to reject new ideas, like dismissing electric cars just because gasoline cars are the norm. Don't get stuck in the past.
Exactly. But EP29 offers balance. Just because a law or norm doesn't work everywhere doesn't mean it's useless. The Bohr atom model is still useful for teaching basics.
Okay.
But EP30 stresses that inapplicability should make us re-examine things, like Newtonian physics limitations led to Einstein.
A trigger for progress.
Right. EP31 suggests norms should ideally get replaced by laws with known error margins as we learn more, like climate science, using specific studies instead of just blaming natural cycles for extreme weather.
Getting more precise.
And the chapter notes norms don't really change through formal inquiry like laws do, EP32, and trying to force norm changes often doesn't stick, EP33.
Interesting. Norms evolve more organically.
Yeah.
Okay, so how do laws and norms change? Part 5.
Yeah. EP24 says new laws are needed for deeper or broader understanding. Einstein explaining more than Newton, for example.
Expanding our view.
EP25 highlights that intuition, curiosity can spark changes, like the discovery challenging the central dogma in biology. In EP26, recognizing flaws drives change. Like finding the H. pylori bacteria completely changed how we understood ulcers, moving away from just stress and diet.
Correcting mistakes.
And EP28, changing needs drive change too. The HIV/AIDS crisis forced new understanding of infectious diseases.
So questioning, curiosity, recognizing flaws, changing needs, all drivers of progress. Lastly, Part 6, general principles. What stands out here?
EP34 states objectivity is an absolute. Think about choices in journalism, what gets covered, how it's framed.
Never purely objective.
So EP35 suggests objectivity is more like the overlap of many subjective views, like academic peer review trying to find consensus.
Interesting way to put it.
EP36 warns that relying on too few viewpoints can create a delusion of objectivity, like early psychology mostly studying weird societies.
Narrow perspectives.
EP37 reminds us the same action doesn't always yield the same outcome. Even identical marketing campaigns can perform differently.
Too many variables.
And EP39 notes living beings might not repeat things exactly the same way. A punctual person might be late one day for reasons we don't know.
Right. Humans aren't machines.
Absolutely. Then EP40 says no group automatically gets priority for benefits. Like designing public transport, it should serve everyone equitably.
There it is.
EP42 makes equity the primary criterion, considering people's overlapping identities and differing needs. Think resource allocation in schools.
Okay.
EP43 adds that equity must consider existing advantages and disadvantages in different contexts, like workplace diversity initiatives trying to level the playing field.
Contextual equity.
EP47 suggests capability deficits often signal unmet needs. Poor customer service might mean poor training.
Look for the root cause.
EP50 notes that bigger capability gaps need more energy from those with more capability to bridge the gap.
Shared responsibility.
EP52 says resource allocation should consider need, effective use, and potential for growth.
Smart allocation.
EP53 emphasizes that physical, cognitive, and emotional capabilities are all linked. We need a holistic view, like in good healthcare.
Whole person.
And finally, EP55. A valid assessment needs to look at intentions, feelings, actions, and context. Think performance reviews, they should be comprehensive.
Wow, okay. Those general principles really stress fairness, context, holism, multiple perspectives. Very insightful. Now, the chapter uses a case study, right? A pharmaceutical company.
Yes, a classic ethical dilemma scenario.
How did that illustrate these reconciled principles?
So the company has this promising new drug, potentially life-saving. The dilemma is release it quickly based on good early results but limited long-term safety data.
Lore.
Or do years more testing for comprehensive safety data, delaying access for potentially desperate patients.
Tough call. How do the principles apply?
The chapter connects it to several EPs. For instance, ET40, no automatic precedence for any group. This highlights the tension between current patients needing the drug now versus protecting future patients from unknown long-term risks.
One group's immediate need versus another group's potential future risk.
Exactly. Then EP42, equity. What's more equitable? Fast access for the critically ill,
Right.
or maximum safety for everyone who might take it later?
No easy answer there.
None at all. EP47, capability deficits as unmet needs. The lack of current treatments is a huge unmet need driving the push for faster release.
Right.
And EP52, resource allocation. Do you put resources into rushing release for immediate need or into extensive testing for long-term safety and broader potential benefit?
So the principles don't give one simple answer, but they highlight the different ethical angles, the trade-offs.
Precisely. The chapter stresses that these conflicts don't mean the principles are bad, they just show how complex real-world ethics are. Multiple valid ethical concerns often pull in different directions.
So resolution requires
Right.
careful balancing.
Careful weighing of the specific context, and maybe looking for creative solutions. The chapter even hints at things like a controlled release with close monitoring as a way to try and balance immediate access with ongoing safety evaluation.
A middle path, maybe? Trying to address multiple concerns. Makes sense.
Oh.
Okay, as we wrap this up, it feels like the author offered some key reflections. Worth summarizing those.
Definitely. 5 main takeaways. First, ethics in professional life is too complex for just one framework. Reconciliation, blending principles is more adaptable, more inclusive.
Okay, be flexible.
Second, laws and norms are human-made, limited. We need to critically examine and adapt them as things change.
Don't accept rules blindly.
Third, objectivity isn't absolute truth. It's more like overlapping perspectives. Recognizing that helps avoid false certainty.
Embrace multiple viewpoints.
Fourth, equity is central. Recognizing overlapping identities and diverse needs is key to fairness.
Put equity first.
And finally, capability building is holistic, physical, cognitive, emotional. Deficits aren't just failings, they're unmet needs.
See the whole picture, focus on support. Those are really valuable takeaways. Open-mindedness, critical thinking, equity. Seems like a solid foundation.
Yeah.
So for you, our listener, as you think about all these diverse schools, these reconciled principles, maybe consider the norms and rules in your own professional life.
Yeah, how do they stack up?
Right. And in what ways might applying a more reconciled view, like we've discussed, lead to maybe more equitable and, well, more effective outcomes in your work? Definitely something to mull over.
Food for thought.
Absolutely. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive.